Hello, everybody. I just wanted to let you know we're going to be releasing two special bonus episodes. The first one is happening right now, and the reason for the bonus episodes is we've hit a milestone that I didn't think I would reach. I'm happy I did, and if I was going to reach it, I certainly didn't think we would reach it as fast as I did. But we've hit over 1,000 downloads of the GrimDark History podcast, and that's certainly not possible without all the people that are interested in what I have to say, interested in exploring the fiction of popular fiction and history and how those things work together. But I'm glad that you do enjoy it. And in celebration of your support of the podcast, we're going to be doing two special bonus episodes. And I just wanted to call out, as I'm doing the podcast, you get statistics a little bit on the types of, or at least where people are in the world that are downloading your episodes. And I just wanted to call out that there are two people in New Zealand, which is about as far away as geographically possible from where I am in Halifax, Canada. And those two people in New Zealand have downloaded and listened to every single episode of my podcast. So, whoever you are, I want to say thank you. You've been with the podcast right from the beginning. And feel free to say hello on Twitter or send me an email at grimdarkhistory@gmail.com sometime. I'd like to hear your thoughts, and if you have suggestions for future episodes, let me know. But as it is right now, we've got two bonus episodes coming, and we're going to release them a week apart from each other. So it's out of the normal release cycle of once per month. That's still going to happen. But for the month of October, we've got two extra episodes are going to drop, and the first one is right now. So I hope you enjoy it, and we're going to have some fun with these next two episodes. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special episode of the GrimDark History Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Agnew, and I just wanted to say thanks to everybody for all your support as we've got this podcast off the ground. Today is going to be a special bonus episode, so I thought what I would do for the bonus episode, since our first season here is really talking about the Warhammer 40,000 lore and how it connects to history and the people and places of history. I thought it would be fun to reach out to all the fans of the Warhammer 40,000 lore, and we're going to do a top 10 episode of who are the people in history that the fans voted that the Emperor could have been. So for this, it's a special episode, and for a special episode, I need a special co-host. So I reached out to all my massive Rolodeck of people that I know, and I do have a special co-host. I have Laura Whiteland, who's the co-creator and co-host of the Chaos Divided podcast. Thanks so much, Laura, for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah.
And I hope that I was at the bottom of the Rolodex, because I know you have some pretty famous people in the back of your pocket. So
Yeah.
I'm glad I could fill in for all of them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Actually, I got a surprise coming up in the new year, so I hope it works out. But if it does, it'll be pretty awesome. But you were one of the I love your show, and your show does talk about the lore of Warhammer 40,000 very often. And you're a big fan of the lore, and as we've been chatting, I've been finding out you're actually also a big fan of history too.
A little bit, yeah. I'm a little self-read. So yeah, the lore for 40K is interesting. I actually recently did like a big read through of Dune, which has kind of cemented that a little further. 40K is very much based out of Frank Herbert's works. So been finding myself getting in deeper, but kind of the big way that I stayed connected with Warhammer for years was reading the Heresy novels.
Yeah.
So the lore has always been very close to my heart.
Yeah, me too. I especially over COVID, I dove headfirst into the lore. I read through a pile of the Horus Heresy books, and while I've been waiting for the next one to come out, I've just been chewing through a bunch of different other ones too. So I love the Warhammer 40,000 lore. I'm glad you do too. I really dig your podcast. Alrighty, so before we dive into what we're doing, just to talk a little bit about how I even got to this list that we have today. So, what I did was I reached out to the 40K lore subreddit some time ago, and I just asked the question to the people who love to talk about the lore on that Reddit without even them knowing what it was about. So, I just asked who was their favorite person from history that they felt the Emperor of Mankind could have been. And we got a lot of responses. It was great. We had over 350 responses to that question, which was nice. Some of them were, your typical internet silly stuff. Donald Trump and Elon Musk were fans' snarky favorite comments.
I could see Donald Trump. That's a cult of personality right there.
Yeah, but he's so incompetent.
I mean, is the Emperor always super competent?
I suppose. Yeah, yeah. That's just a step down from Alexander the Great, though, isn't it? Like,
You know what though? I always think of when you look at like historical examples of the Emperor, it's more the Emperor like trying things out and trying to nudge,
yeah,
rather than like necessarily like taking the active role you see in 30K.
hmm
I see kind of the historical references more as trying to push in a direction or experimenting with his own powers and his own abilities.
okay, yeah, I like that. I disagree that it's Trump, though, but
I don't
I
know.
don't know. Alrighty, but anyways, we got a lot of good responses, 350 plus responses. Some of them people picked people who were actually the emperor. We know he was in the lore. Alexander the Great came up quite a bit, but of course we know he was Alexander the Great. Saint George was also one that popped up quite a bit, but we know the emperor was Saint George. And tune in for a future podcast episode as we talk about the life of Saint George, the real historical figure. So, what we did was kind of take through all of those, and of the ones that we know the emperor wasn't, so maybe he could have been this, it's just not in the lore. I picked what I thought was kind of the most interesting of that group, and then I put it together in a little online voting platform, and then I reached out to subreddits as well as some of the Discord servers I'm on with you and everybody else, and just asked people to vote for who their favorite person was. And we've got a top 10 list as voted by everybody who is the fan of the lore. So I'm excited to go through this list. How about you?
You know what? There's definitely some in here that I'm like really chomping at the bit to get into,
All right.
and there's some of them that are almost like they're almost too possible. So we'll get into it.
Sure. Yeah, and a couple of them are a little out of left field, which I thought was interesting too.
Hmm.
All right. Well, let's start with our last place people. So these people are tied in 8th, ninth, and 10th place. And first on our list, but certainly not last, but among the last, is Irene of Athens. So Irene of Athens, she lived from 750 to 803 Common Era. She ruled as regent and then empress of the Eastern Roman Empire for 22 years. So, for everybody who's maybe not necessarily familiar with the Eastern Roman Empire, you probably know Byzantium, and that is what we're talking about when we're talking about the Eastern Roman Empire. One of her famous claims to fame, she had her own son's eyes gouged out in order to put down his attempt to take over the throne. So blinding people in Byzantium was one way to prevent them from ruling. If you're maimed, you could not become emperor. She also called the Second Council of Nicaea that reestablished the worship of icons, i.e., the cross, which had been banned as heretical for about 20 years prior to that. She was fantastically ruthless. She blinded her own son. She forced other legitimate heirs to the throne into the priesthood, which also disqualified them from ruling. I don't know why she didn't force her own son into that, but she wanted to blind him. She also, when the Council of Nicaea was going to vote to allow the worship of icons, it actually had been broken up by pro-iconoclast military. So she actually created a fake war against the Muslims, and she got this group of everybody who was in the military and against the ruling. She tricked them to believe that there was a war happening. She got them all outside the city, had them all surrounded by her army, had them disarmed and then disbanded, and then she called the second meeting of that Council of Nicaea in order to get that ruling put through, which I thought was pretty cool. That's something right out of The Godfather. And then she also had she was trying to make political ties with Charlemagne, but the Pope, that's the one in Rome, he crowned Charlemagne Holy Roman Emperor in order to delegitimize her rule. So that's the nutshell of Irene of Athens. What do you think about that one?
I mean, there's definitely some very Warhammer 40k inspiration to be found in here. Even councils of Nicaea maybe making any fans of Magnus a little nervous.
Sure, that's a little on the nose, isn't it?
Right. So that's a pretty evident connection right there. But yeah, the use of religion and power feels very emperor to me.
Yeah, I like that. And very ruthless, and also, like you said, the use of power, being able, taking, an entire part of the army and then having them, surrounded, dismantled, and disbanded. That's 3D level chess that she's playing.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned, why didn't she just force her own son into the priesthood? I think that would have been maybe seen as an illegitimate seizure of power, because they would have been the presumed emperor.
Yeah.
So I mean, even the use of violence and then the use of sort of power and influence simultaneously, I think is very emblematic of kind of what you see unfold like in the early days of like the emperor.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely a lot there that kind of ties in. So I actually think it's a really great example. And it's almost a shame that it was voted down so low, because I think it's actually probably a really strong example.
I know. I like the use of politics, the use of force, and religion to get her own way, and she ruled one of the largest empires in the world for quite a bit of time, actually.
Who was literally a Roman empress.
Yes. Yeah.
So I mean, like, yeah. No, and you know what? I sometimes think people kind of discount women as representing the emperor, but the emperor doesn't really have gender in that concept. The emperor appears as like they want to be perceived, not necessarily like they don't have a base form, if that makes any sense.
You're absolutely right, and I'm going to grab a quote here. I should have had it ready that actually proves that. Hold on one second.
Because yeah, even some of the stories where like everyone who interacts with the Emperor sees someone different, um, and even like the shifting face is often referenced, but
You're absolutely right, and I'm going to find that quote, but we're going to move. I don't have it handy, but I am going to find it while I'm digging that up. Why don't you tell us about who's next on our list?
all right, so this is one I'm maybe a little bit less familiar with, but we've got King Pyrrhus of Epirus.
That's right, yeah.
I'm gonna hope I get
Yeah.
all of these right. Fought in no less than 7 major battles against Rome, Sparta, Argos, and Phrygia. Widely regarded as one of the greatest Greek generals in all of antiquity, second only to Alexander the Great, which I mean, you know, everyone's second at some point to Alexander the Great.
Yeah.
This is according to Plutarch, the Roman historian, and the Carthaginian terror of Rome, Hannibal Barca. I like that title you gave Hannibal
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
I would have gone with elephant riding madman, but anyways, claim to fame in the modern era of the phrase Pyrrhic victory, coined after he simultaneously defeated 3 separate Roman armies in battle and was quoted as saying, "If we are victorious in one more battle with the Romans, we shall be utterly ruined." Also famously had a magic toe that was all that was left of him after he died and was cremated. The toe immune to fire. The toe was immune to fire and could cure disease.
Yeah, how about
That
that?
sounds pretty magic right
Yeah.
there.
Magical toe cures disease.
Yeah, I mean, this one actually feels like a little weaker of a connection. Just the Emperor doesn't tend to lose
You're
all that often.
Yeah, you're right. And I'll say this. He he didn't technically lose. He did win. It's the Pyrrhic victory. He just didn't have enough left in order to, seal the deal, if you want to say that.
You know what though? I looking at I'm an Emperor's Children fan, and the Emperor is completely fine, absolutely wasting military resources into the ground, literally into dust. So I don't think the Emperor believes in the concept of a Pyrrhic victory. So this sounds like someone who's maybe a little bit too concerned with like the human cost of things, which is very not Emperor.
That's true, and an early form of what will become the Astra Militarum, the endless tide of people you can throw at somebody.
If you can make your enemy run out of bullets, then eventually you'll win.
Mm-hmm.
And realistically, yeah, somebody who's somewhat self-aware of this. I mean, technically the Emperor can grow and change, but he doesn't tend to. He doesn't tend to like evolve as a character. He's pretty like single-minded in a lot of things.
Yeah, I feel like what we see, and we don't see the Emperor too much in the actual lore. He's this ethereal figure in the background. Probably the most Emperor we've seen so far has been really the End in the Death Part 1 and Part 2, obviously, but we haven't got that yet, and Master of Mankind, which I think is probably the most content we've seen of the Emperor saying or doing anything.
Yeah, and I mean, from a literary perspective, the Emperor should generally talk less because talking about Dune, Leto II, which the Emperor is based off of, talks way too much, and it kind of takes the mystique away. So I kind of like that they've kept him as a background character.
I like it too. I like that he's in the background. I like that, a lot of people, and this is a contentious opinion. That's fine. You're here to give voice an alternate opinion if you want. But my opinion is, anytime the Emperor's written in the actual lore as saying anything, I think the authors were deliberately conscious to write it as though you could take it either way.
Yeah, and that kind of feeds into they've with the heresy, I think they've taken somewhat, and I think this is a bit of an appropriate approach because there is like some contradictions and like back and forth in the heresy. And even from the early days, 40K was written with an unreliable narrator.
Hmm.
And I think the heresy, like you're telling the story of this like very specific, very like condensed period of time in something as big as Warhammer 40K. But they've really given it a lot of room to like breathe and also, you know, mean different things in almost a way of like creating its own inaccuracy.
Yeah.
So, and again, coming back to this guy, that really doesn't. This guy seems a does not seem like the most political operator either. He seems like a little more blunt force.
Yeah. It's more
You
emperor,
know,
isn't it?
Julius Caesar, he is not.
No. Now, while I had been doing research on my last episode, which was Theseus and the Minotaur, we talked a little bit about Olanius Pius, or Olanius Person, who's another perpetual alive at this time. And there's a fan theory out there, and I like the theory. I talked about it in the episode, where Olanius Person, we know in the lore he's a member of the crew of Jason and the Argonauts, who's alive at this time. And one of the theories out there is that there is a member of the Argonauts, a man by the name of Athalides, who's a son of a god and a princess. But he has an immortal soul in the Jason the Argonaut. So every time he dies, he comes back to life and he remembers everything about his previous life. And one of the things that Athalides is in the lore is he becomes many different people. But one of the people he does become, according to the lore of Jason and the Argonauts, is King Pyrrhus. So, what do you think about that one?
So Olanius is King Pyrrhus. Is that?
Yeah. So if Olanius was in the crew of Jason and the Argonauts, and we know he was in the crew of Jason and the Argonauts because we actually see his memories in the lore, but we don't know who he was. And of course, there are a lot of different people on the crew of the Argonauts. But we do know one of the people in the crew of the Argonauts was this guy named Athalides, who every time he died, reincarnated and had memories of his previous life. Kind of sounds like a perpetual, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can see a different perpetual being King Pyrrhus. I mean, having someone who is anyone who's kind of got that exemplary quality and the ability to sort of foresee mistakes. I mean, if you look at the ancient world, people didn't tend to have broad perspectives. That was something that was usually quite difficult because travel was difficult.
Yeah.
You have such minute like microcultures that you could travel 50 kilometers and deal with a bunch of different cultures that were very similar. Especially within the Greek world where they had their whole colonialism thing going on.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So having lifetimes of experience would definitely give you a huge advantage. Yeah, that's interesting. And also, I just want to say, naming a perpetual old person is the best name ever. So.
Oh yeah, yeah. I liked it too. There's a lot of hate on the internet about that, but I think it's a great name.
Warhammer is silly. Okay, you know what? This shouldn't be a hot take because it's designed to be silly.
Yeah.
But Warhammer's silly. It's not meant to be super serious. It is satire.
Yep. Oh yeah, it's the obvious, on the nose, heavy, violent satire. But you're right, it's satire.
It's to its core. So
now I did, while we've been talking, find that quote I was looking for. So I'm just going to read that now. So here we go. Over the millennia, he has worn many masks, each suitable to the task at hand. His mind, his greatest gift, allows him significant flexibility in such things. He has appeared as male or female, or neither, as child or elder, peasant or king, magician or fool. He has been an entire cartomatic arcana, for the master of mankind is also a master of disguise. And that's a quote from The End and the Death, Part 1.
There we go. The Emperor confirmed trans.
Yep. Well, trans and neither, and everything.
Well, non-binaries under the trans umbrella, so that's
okay.
that's
right.
pretty. We'll take it.
Yeah. Or should we move on to our next person?
Absolutely.
All right, this one came out of left field for me, and I thought it was really cool, so I had it included in the list. It got a few upvotes. This is King Narasan of Thailand, who lived from 1555 Common Era to 1605. And I went down a rabbit hole looking into this. This guy could probably do with a podcast episode of his own. But he secured the independence of Thailand, which at the time was called the Kingdom of Ayutthaya, from the Burmese Empire. Now the Burmese Empire controlled basically all of Southeast Asia at the time. And so one of the things that Narasan did is he was a royal prisoner of the King of Burma for early childhood and his early teen years. He was released in kind of a prisoner exchange where his father sent his sister to the King of Burma to be one of the concubines of the king, and that released Narasan back to Thailand, or Ayutthaya as it was called. And he swore oaths of loyalty to the king, as everybody did kind of back then. But the King of Burma did not trust Narasan, sent assassins to go kill him. And the assassins at the time, when they, rather than kill Narasan, they instead told him of the plot. Narasan didn't want to have any of that, so he raised an army, convinced other neighboring kingdoms to rebel against Burma, and then basically fought a war against the King of Burma that culminated in the legend is it culminated in a one-on-one battle with Narasan versus the son of the King of Burma, dueling each other to death on elephants. I couldn't find that had actually happened. There was a battle, and the Prince of Burma does die in the battle, but there's nothing there about an elephant duel, which I think would be awesome if that was true. But he, after he secured the independence of Thailand, he invaded some of the other neighboring kingdoms and ruled for 15 years. Thailand was the largest kingdom it would ever be by the time he was done. And that's, Narasan in a nutshell. What do you think about that?
You know what? There's a lot of things that both make me think it is and is not the Emperor. Mm-hmm. But also, some of the things that are making me think that it might not be the Emperor actually might be like that whole theory of like him playing with personas and personalities and trying to sort of see through what would happen, like taking the role of more of the rebellious, I guess almost counter conqueror, because it wasn't really necessarily like a freedom fighter situation. It was really more of a an autarch taking the reins back from removing that kind of client status from the kingdom, which is kind of lines up with how some of the very, very early history of like Terra being unified kind of runs.
Like the techno-barbarian period.
Yeah, like how the Emperor kind of dealt with that, because realistically, like, they didn't have the followers at that point to necessarily employ the same tactics. So yeah, you know what? This actually, like, the more I'm thinking about it, the more it might make sense as far as a almost like a practice period. The dueling on elephants seems logistically impossible, but also really cool.
Well, I think if they
doubt it happened.
Yeah, I think if they were dueling on elephants, I don't think they're going at each other with lances or anything, but I think that there would probably be throwing spears or javelins at each other, maybe firing bows and arrows.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a propaganda piece right there.
Yeah,
But it's a cool thought.
yeah. That'd be an epic, make for an epic miniature model, wouldn't it be?
Oh, you could with some of the Lord of the Rings stuff. You could definitely do that. That'd be cool.
Yeah. Now,
Um,
well, here's another maybe interesting thing to chew on because Thailand is not so far from Tibet, where that's the future place of the palace of the emperor.
hmm. I thought
Maybe.
it was Nepal. I thought that's where it actually is.
Well, I think. Well, it's the entire Tibetan plateau is where the palace of the emperor is.
Okay. I
So
thought.
yeah, so the the um, the Mechanicum, and prior to him getting the Mechanicum, they basically flattened the entire Tibetan plateau
Okay.
and use it as his palace.
Um, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different because I do think of I know the Imperial Truth was sort of the marching orders at the time of the heresy, um, but I definitely think the Emperor played with religion a lot more. If we're looking at how to control societies and how to steer, I think playing with religion and spirituality was definitely a part of that. So I can see there's a lot of convergence of religious ideas in that space. So yeah, I
Yep.
can see the Emperor being very aware and stepping in. The other thing I can also think, realistically, the Emperor can step into these roles as well. As a powerful psyker, realistically, the Emperor could kidnap these people, step into their lives for 10, 15, 20 years, and then basically erase the members of being kidnapped to the person, and then kind of step back out of that role. I think the Emperor sat around as a baby? No. But I can see them taking on these roles of okay, I'm going to spend the next 20 years trying to accomplish this. Can I do it? What do I learn? And just methodically, basically playing with humanity
Yeah.
to
No, I can see that for sure. Absolutely.
so this definitely sounds like okay, how do I overthrow a tyrannical government with more resources, more power? What do I do? What levers do I pull?
Yeah.
100% can see it.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Here's because the Burmese Empire is, this is the age of exploration. So Portugal, England, Spain, they're all trying to, get control or keep control of the Spice Islands, of which Thailand is kind of part of that. And, according to the Europeans, there are three major powers in this area, and India's one, China's the other, and the Burmese Empire is the third one. That even the Europeans think we do not want to mess with them. And here is the emperor overthrowing them.
Yeah, so I could definitely see that being a bit of a talking about I know a Che Guevara esque figure as well, kind of playing with those just I guess human mechanics of society and an empire.
I like it. I like it. This
Yeah,
is a good pick.
absolutely.
All right.
We haven't had a bad pick yet.
Not yet. No. How about you want to do our next person?
Sure. So we have I Qin Shi Huang. Is
And
that correct?
I think I Chin. I believe it.
Qin Shi Huang.
I think I'm not speaking Chinese. Well, neither of us obviously aren't speaking Chinese, but
Yeah,
we're going to do our best, and everybody's going to forgive us. I think.
maybe, hopefully. They ended the Warring States period in China, roughly 300-year long civil war. They were the first person to unify all of the lands we now think of as China. They set many of the standards still in use today as ways to develop a singular cultural identity among dozens of different peoples and cultures. They abolished the feudal system 1,000 years before Europe, set a single language currency, standardized weights and measures, standardized road and cart sizes for goods to travel from one end to the other, and built new canals, roadways to facilitate trade and communication, conquered all of China in just 11 years, and survived 3 separate assassination attempts while doing it, including his own mother's attempt.
Yeah, that's somebody.
That sounds very, you know what, we take it for granted now, but having standardized weights, measurements, roads, all of that, like the Romans did it in Europe,
Hmm.
and that's what's kind of carried on into North America. That's a huge deal.
It is. I think Alexander the Great conquered a whole lot of land, but he didn't do any actual empire building. This, I think, is an actual attempt at empire building, and a good one, because, well, it's lasted till today.
Yeah, like, if you think about, knowing as a merchant that your cart will fit down every road you need to go down, and it will fit through every village you travel through, every city you travel through. Like, those are huge deals that simplify trade in a time that allows you to conquer inland states. Like, logistically, managing coastal areas is not that complicated
Yeah.
because ships do a lot of the heavy lifting, but inland areas are where things get really complicated.
Yeah, especially when
Um,
you've got there's quite a few mountains that split up China, and
yeah,
I can just imagine being a Chinese merchant. You got your one cart, and you maybe your first time going through on this trip, and you get halfway through the mountains, and all of a sudden the road is half the size it was a little while ago, and you got 3 tons of copper or something. And
well, if you think about a caravan,
yeah.
like,
Oh my
if your
God, a
cart doesn't fit
caravan.
down the
Yeah.
road and you get left behind,
Yeah.
you're very likely dead.
Yep.
So, like, we're talking about simplification, but then also proliferation of trade,
Hmm.
which increases quality of life. Like, those are the things that allow nations to, surpass their creators effectively, is people feeling like being together is better than being apart, which is really like, you know what? It's not necessarily reminding me of like 30K, but like the sort of the dark age of technology, like the post Iron Men rebellion, um, eight golden age of humanity.
Yep.
Like, it's reminding me a lot of that, which I would imagine, again, it's not necessarily specified, but the Emperor probably had a hand in ushering that in.
Yeah, I feel like um, that would be an interesting part to write about, but I would really love to hear like pre-unification. Not even necessarily the Emperor of Mankind, but other people in that world. Just
Mm,
do it because that's the world of kingdoms and little. It's like ancient history to us. Little kingdoms warring each other and things like that. I'd like to see novels in that, but this reminds me, like you said, of actual empire building efforts here.
well, and the only thing that gives me somewhat pause here is abolishing the feudal system, because the Emperor has shown that feudal structures are favored. Even in 30K, like petty fiefdoms and planetary governors, and it's a very like Roman style feudal system.
Hmm.
Um, but the Emperor doesn't like to get his hands dirty with like the day to day governing typically,
Yeah,
which is where you kind of see more of that like feudal style oligarchies that are still held to like an iron will. Like, the Emperor exerts a lot of pressure on those oligarchs to like do what he wants them to do. But as far as like day to day like governing, like, he's like doing his golden throne thing, or he's like going and killing a bunch of orcs. Like, he's not like sitting there worrying about like how are the freighters going to like arrive at Terra.
yeah.
Like, that's not his jam. So that's the only thing that's giving me a little bit of pause of like, I don't think he is actually that guy.
Well, I feel like in 30K, the world, well, even you know pre heresy 30K. We're talking about the unification, or not necessarily the unification, but
Like the Great Crusade.
the Great Crusade. And I feel like there's two types of imperial government. There's the government that immediately surrounds the Emperor of Mankind. There's his military people, but there's still the High Lords of Terra, and they do run democracy. However shadowy it is, it's there in the background, and I feel like the government that kind of immediately surrounds the Emperor, that is a meritocracy. However, once the Crusades started going out there and, like you said, running into other worlds of humanity, and they're running imperial, or not, well, imperial systems or feudal systems, and dismantling that's a multi-generational society changing effort. And to do that on a global scale, I think that would be really difficult. I think the Emperor's just okay with, okay, you do your own thing at the planetary level, but as long as you're interacting with the greater thing that moves goods and ties and everything around the Imperium, that operates under my meritocracy. That's what I in my head, that's how I think it works, but maybe it doesn't.
I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a meritocracy. Like, I think like Malkador is, I think, very much involved in that side of it. Like when he's alive, and yeah, I really don't think it's necessarily a meritocracy. I think it's a lot of compromises. Like if you look at the Mechanicum, unification is full of compromises.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So I would imagine like the High Lords of Terra also, they control a tremendous amount of wealth. They control a tremendous amount of power themselves. They have their own alliances. They have their own political operatives. I highly doubt it's like a straight meritocracy. Now, maybe how he tried to envision like the Primarchs.
Yeah.
But that's more of a like negligent father meritocracy where he's just like, I like you based on how effective you are at doing my will.
Yeah.
So I don't know how great that also works. So yeah, I don't know. I think that the Emperor is somewhat like, uncompromising as far as like the overall vision, but as far as like details, yeah, I can't see him being a guy like mapping out road plans and like making sure that the roads get built right. Yeah. Like it's just like he's not that. I don't think he's that guy.
He's got his Malkador to do that for him.
Exactly, and like maybe this is also how like, this guy also functioned. But I just think like this maybe was like, I can see the Emperor maybe being involved in like the shadows supporting this person, but actually being the person, I don't know. It seems a little too like organized and just like boring, honestly.
There was a lot of you don't find standardized weights and measures.
Like it's like I like and we know that the Emperor's a scientist, but again, like I don't know. I can't see him like. Can you like? Do you think the Emperor's just sitting there like going through like council meetings of just like, I think we need to base it off of 1 cubic inch of lead is the base of our weight. No, he's not doing that. He's like woken up the guy and like given him the memories he needs, and then like he's off to his next project.
Okay, all right, I like that.
He might have done the war and the unification part, and he's just like, I'm out.
I'm done. This is the fun part. You can take over now.
Yeah, he's like, I've gotten out of this what I want to get out of this.
Alrighty, shall we move on to our next one? This is one you were excited about.
I am very excited about this guy.
Tell us about our next one.
Otto von Bismarck, the Biz Stash himself, lived in a period of extreme turmoil and war in all of Europe and the Middle East, only like half of which he caused. Catherine the Great, Napoleon the First through Napoleon the Third, the U.S. Civil War, French Revolutions, just many of them, Greek War of Independence, Garibaldi's unification of Italy, and more. Also was born sort of the end of the German like religious wars that had plagued Germany for like the last
Oh,
300 years.
the Protestant Catholic stuff.
Conflicts
Yeah,
of the what Martin Luther started.
yeah.
Um, had a vision of a peaceful Europe not racked by wars, and helped to forge multiple alliances between great powers. What was it called? The Great Entente? Was that
Triple
his
Entente.
vision? Triple Entente. In an attempt to defer any one expansionist government from threatening the balance in Europe. I like how it's any one expansionist government because they were all expansionist. It was just don't want to get one a leg up.
Yeah.
This could be a primordial precursor to the idea of the League of Nations and United Nations in the future. I would disagree with that part
Okay.
because Bismarck did not necessarily have a vision of like peaceful cooperation. It was more like it was a very pragmatic view of like almost like mutually assured destruction.
Yeah. And that's almost exactly what happened in World War One.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can. So Otto von Bismarck, I can see. Actually, you know what? Because I feel like I'm gonna have a lot to say about this one. What are your thoughts?
I like it. It's another in my mind. This is if we're imagining the emperor inhabiting different people at different times and trying different things, I think I like it for this because this is a new way to try to build an empire and can we unify people through politics and peace. Now, obviously he did do quite a bit of war, blood and iron and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I was about to say the French might disagree with you on him being peaceful.
Yes, yeah, but in his mind, and as with everything, it's not black and white. But in his mind, he wanted to unify all the kind of Germanic-speaking people under one government. And once he got that, even though the French didn't necessarily agree with it, he was done.
You know what though? It wasn't Germanic-speaking people because he specifically excluded Austria because he wanted it to be a Prussian-led.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
so
that's
that's why
interesting.
Austria. Yeah, he specifically maneuvered to keep Austria out of what was Germany. Austria was interested, and it would have created one unified German-speaking country, but he wanted it to be Prussian-led. What was it? It wasn't the king of Germany. It was the king in Prussia. Was the I think during some of the periods of unification because it happened piecemeal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, at one point was it Wilhelm? Can't remember which Wilhelm. Was the king in Prussia was the compromise. So he was the king of Germany, but the princes at the time didn't like that title, so he was effectively like the highest ranking noble. But it was a very like Prussia-centric view that Bismarck held. And I think actually going back to the conversation we were just having previously, that like oligarchical feudal type system, this is where I actually think like Bismarck very much like encapsulates a lot of what the emperor does, because Bismarck is just kind of a puppet master.
Yeah.
And he doesn't really get involved in a lot of the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah. And the system that he builds, it's part democracy and then part absolute autocratic power. Because the king of Germany, even though there's a Reichstag and there's elected people, but those elected people are still the younger class, which Bismarck is part of. The king still has the absolute authority to declare wars and declare peace, and the Reichstag and was it the Bundestag, I think the two levels of government there. There's nothing they can do about it. The military answers to the king. And so the government that's built is like almost a fake democracy because the king still has all the power, and even though obviously the the nobles, Otto von Bismarck, they actually have all the power because the king really can't do anything without all their say so. But on paper, the king kind of still has absolute authority, doesn't he?
Yeah, and that's where I think Bismarck is very much like. Well, if we talk about the Emperor versus Malkador,
Mm-hmm.
this is where like the Emperor is acting as sort of his own Malkador, but then using the figurehead. Because yeah, the German king at this point, Bismarck is kind of just like running. So it's almost like he knew he couldn't invest absolute power in the chancellor's seat,
Mm-hmm.
which is where Bismarck positions himself. So he almost uses the king as his scapegoat
Yeah.
and his sort of like expediency, where it's like, okay, he has enough power to do the things that he needs to do quickly, and then like the democracy doesn't get in the way of what Bismarck's actually trying to do.
Yeah. So you like him as the puppet master in the background, pulling the strings of his puppet king, who has all the power on paper, but Bismarck has all the influence on the king and still gets everything that he wants done. And if people don't like it, well, they blame the king.
Well, if you think about like playing a game of Civilization on like the hardest difficulty, like I think this is maybe like the Emperor set a challenge for himself of like, hey, can I run an empire and like completely change a political landscape in the confines of not being the most powerful guy in the room and also playing with the most like fractious and not technically most powerful empire? Can I like cause a bunch of more powerful people around me? Can I just like beguile them into doing what I want? Like I have a feeling it's almost like it's like a speed run challenge of like how fast can I bring what is it, 100% peace in Europe
Yeah.
in 30 years?
So
Like,
this
can
is,
I pull it
he's
off?
trying to win the game of civilization through peace.
But then also just like declares a bunch of surprise wars. Um, so like, yeah, I think it's definitely like it's like a challenge mode, like political intrigue story, and I can 100% see the Emperor just being like, he woke up on like 1803 and he's just like, you know what, I haven't tried a ridiculously hard like political conspiracy in a while. Let me start pondering this. And he's just like looking around, he's just like, oh, Germany's kind of starting to like solidify a bit, Europe's getting a little like uppity, like let's see if I can calm this down and then just like cause the worst war ever because of it. So like yeah, it's kind of got a lot of like the Emperor playing with humanity and like, but also coming into that kind of like survival of the species. Like, you both need to avoid, like, you need to avert total war, but then you also need to like, in that type of mindset, you also want to push humanity forward, um, which is often like through a very violent lens. So yeah, I can see Bismarck kind of doing both, because then you also like Bismarck's also very much responsible for the First World War. Um, like everything he sets up just ends up going sideways within like 20 years of his death. So
So,
yeah,
so do you like you? Sounds like you like Bismarck for being Emperor of Mankind. Is that one of your?
100%. No,
Yeah.
I think but it's like it's the Emperor of Mankind like playing. It's like the Emperor of Mankind is like he's got his own agenda. He's playing six-dimensional chess, and like you don't know what he's up to. He doesn't even know what he's up to, and he's just trying to say like, what can I do? He's just trying to push the limits.
Yeah. All right. So for our I like it. I think it's great, and there's nothing I could say that would top what you just talked about. It was a tour de force on Bismarck. Alrighty, so for our next one, and I had to sub in somebody because there was a lot of votes for Saint George, and we know Saint George was actually in the lore somebody who the emperor was. So what I did was pick somebody who was of roughly that same time period, and I think there's about a 100-year difference between them, but it was also roughly a Roman military type saint. So what we settled on was Saint Patrick, and I also picked Saint Patrick because personally I think he does a lot of potentially emperor-y type stuff. So we'll talk a little bit about Patrick here. He grew up in post-Roman Britain. Spent most of his life either as a slave in Ireland or converting the Irish to Christianity. When he was an early teen, he was captured in an Irish raid, and he was forced into slavery. He escaped. On his way back to England, he was captured again by more pirates and forced into slavery again, and then he escaped again. And when he got back to England, he had a vision at some point to go back to Ireland and convert all the heathens to Christianity. Now, why I like him as emperor is he fights off no less than two demons, one demon on a mountaintop and one hiding in a cellar in an Irish inn. Irish warriors who raise arms against him are struck down with illness. He creates herds of animals out of thin air. He raises people from the dead. And, he's obviously sainted by the Catholic Church, and roughly 80% of Ireland is still Roman Catholic today. What do you think about that?
I don't know, it's sounding more like he's like Nurgle than the Emperor. All of your enemies being struck down by plague, that's feeling very...
Well, not necessarily.
So he wasn't a great unclean one?
Well, could you imagine, if you're describing it as... somebody who's never seen it before, and you're a third party person just standing there, and the local Irish lord's like, I don't know who this guy is trying to convert people to Christianity, but we're going to go put an end to him. And he sends a bunch of guys over, and they pull out their swords, and the emperor just kind of waves his hands, and then they all just kind of fall over. That might and that might just be psychic power. Just yeah. How would you describe that as a person who's never seen psychic power before, that they just fall over, and then a little while later they just get up and go back about their day? A third party person might say they were struck ill.
Actually, you know what? I'm rectifying my point. I think it might still be a Nurgle-y thing, but Nurgle isn't sentient by this point. Nurgle doesn't become sentient for another 700 years.
Yeah.
So this could actually be like the Emperor playing with plague psychic energy.
Okay. Now, the demon he defeats on the mountaintop, he was up there for 40 days without food and water, and he defeated a demonic snake woman who was tormenting him. That kind of sounds a little Slanishy there. Blushing Noise Marine.
I think, the problem with that is Slanesh is 25,000 years from creation. There's no chaos gods at this point.
Now, one of the things that I thought was, and correct me if I'm wrong, I always thought, because the warp is this weird place where time doesn't exist, that you're right, they don't exist yet, and yet as soon as they exist, they will have always existed in the warp, because time doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, so they're technically present, but they're benign forces at that point. So Nurgle at that point, they say they become sentient. So it's not that they didn't exist, but they weren't thinking at that point. Slanesh is the chaos god of love and pain and pleasure. Those emotions exist in the warp. But even I'm pretty sure before sentience, the demons themselves are also not as they're not as driven, because they don't have anything controlling them. So that's the only thing that's this could also it also does play into the Emperor playing with religion. But I also, maybe that was the Emperor just made two demons, because the Emperor can also make demons.
Yeah. Now,
and then just fought them himself. I don't know.
Yeah. Now we also I think it was either Echoes of Eternity or The End of Death Part 1, when we're talking about Olania's person and he's going through his memories, when he's talking about his time. Oh no, it wasn't the end of the death. It was when he was he was on Earth, but in a Noise Marine Slanish a possessed hive city, he was seeing demons there that were like kind of like sirens or mythological sirens. And he has a little PTSD flashback to being with Jason and the Argonauts, and he remembers, the mission in the Argonauts where they go through the Cyclades Islands, and the sirens are screaming to have them crash on shore. So demons existed even that would have been about 2500 BCE, would have been roughly around the time of
No,
Jason and
I know
Argonauts.
they exist. I more so meant they don't necessarily have like directive or like force to behind them.
Yeah, so there's no patron god Slanesh or Nurgle, but there are.
Yeah, so yeah, demons are just kind of like off doing their own thing. They're like NPCs basically at that point. So yeah, I mean I can see it. Do I see it as strongly as some of the other ones?
Yeah, you don't.
Maybe not.
You don't like it?
Not that I don't like it. I don't see the intention
Okay.
behind it. It's like a little too small potatoes for the Emperor.
Okay.
No, well, all the puns intended.
Alrighty. So tell us about our next one.
Oh, Nikola Tesla, which you know what you can almost tell this came from a Reddit poll.
Yeah.
Tesla's got to appear. Inventor, scientist, contemporary of Thomas Edison. Well, contemporary is maybe a strong word. Einstein and Marconi. He was also famously contemptuous of all of them, competing with Edison and Marconi over electrical and wireless technology standards, and refuted Einstein's theory of relativity, developed theoretical superweapons that worked on the principles of vibrations, air pressure, and magnetic and electrical fields. I mean, the other trouble with this one is it overlaps with Bismarck.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he?
Yeah, and I think like Bismarck is definitely closer. Tesla definitely fits the like crazy scientist parts of the Emperor.
Mm-hmm.
I can more so see like Nikola Tesla hanging out with the Emperor.
Yeah.
Not necessarily being the Emperor. Like do like Nikola Tesla and the Emperor sometimes like drink till 4 o'clock in the morning, and the Emperor like tells him about some like crazy esoteric knowledge he has from being thousands of years old.
Yeah.
Sure. As far as like be like living that life, it seems a little less likely.
I agree. I this is probably one of the picks that I least like to be the Emperor of Mankind, only because he didn't really do a whole lot, not from my perspective. I mean, he invented a bunch of stuff, but how many people, does the Tesla coil do anything?
I mean, the whole like alternating current becoming the standard over Edison was a big believer in like direct current,
Yeah.
which is far less efficient. Like Tesla does have like accomplishments; they're just kind of fairly minor in the grand scheme of things
Yep.
compared to like Einstein, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I mean. Like, do I see Tesla in like his like crappy apartment hanging out with the Emperor? Absolutely. Like, I'm sure they're like good buddies, but
they're sitting. They chill out in an opium den, and
yeah, like like when the Emperor needs to like take off the edge and he just wants to go hear some like crazy theories, he's like, all right, let's go talk science with my like my pal Nikola Tesla.
Yeah.
And then Tesla comes out of that being like, wow, I feel like so invigorated, because I'm assuming the presence of the Emperor is probably like a lot to handle, and then he's just like, I'm gonna build a doomsday device. Like, again, like that story makes sense to me. Like the Emperor being like, oh, this is a critical like moment in human history, I'm gonna take on this like destitute scientist's life. I don't know.
Yeah. And doing my research on Nikola Tesla, I was trying to find something we could find for a 40K connection, and the only closest I could come to it was these kind of theoretical super weapons that Tesla always talked about but could never produce. But
I thought he did build one of them. He built an earthquake generator.
yes, did he?
Yeah, and I think he got it working, and it was like I think it tore down an apartment building or something. Yeah, no, I think he did actually get something to somewhat work.
Okay, I'm gonna have to
Um,
look that one up.
yeah, I remember a story of like he had to chop it in half with an axe or something. Um, that's coming to mind. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's a story I've heard.
Okay. Alrighty, so we're getting into our top three now, and we are might gonna break this up into two episodes. So through the magic of editing, we're gonna have a second episode here potentially. Otherwise, if we're all right, we might just do it all as one episode, and we'll find it all. I'll do magical editing, and it'll either be one episode or not. But if it is, we're having an episode break right here.